The hidden power in God's name is something only a few truly understand, the revelation of I am. This profound meaning, spoken by God to Moses on Mount Horeb, holds incredible significance. Picture this. You are alone in a vast desert. The wind softly whispers across the endless dunes, and the setting sun paints the sky in fiery hues of gold and crimson. Suddenly, a bush bursts into flames, but it does not burn. Then, a voice unlike any you've ever heard calls your name. This is what happened to Moses, and what followed would not only transform his life but leave a lasting mark on history. I am who I am. These words were far more than a mere statement. They were a powerful declaration of divine authority, revealing the eternal nature of God. But what does it truly mean? And why is it still one of the most powerful truths in history? Today, many people chase wealth, luxury, and success, believing these things will offer security. But what if I told you the real source of all power and provision lies in understanding God's name, the name he revealed to Moses at Mount Horeb? The one who spoke those words holds the key to everything: guidance, provision, and ultimate purpose. Here's something that might surprise you. The name, I am, is not just an ancient phrase. It holds relevance in your life today, offering answers to your deepest struggles. Whether they are financial burdens, broken relationships, or uncertainty about the future, God's name carries the solution. Stay with me until the end, and you'll uncover something most people overlook about this revelation. Before we dive deeper, if you are committed to growing in your understanding of God's Word and want to experience real transformation, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. What you're about to learn could change your entire perspective. Moses' encounter with God at Mount Horeb is pivotal. But now I need you to do something important. You're here because you value your relationship with God, and you know His Word has the power to transform lives. As a declaration of faith, comment below, I trust that God will lead me to victory over every obstacle. Your words have power, and by saying this, you're speaking it into existence. I'll be reading and responding to each one. Moses never anticipated that his life would change so drastically that day. He was simply tending his father-in-law's flock, guiding sheep through the wilderness near Mount Horeb. For 40 years, he had lived in the desert, far removed from the luxury and power of Egypt, where he once lived as a prince. Now he was just a humble shepherd, but God had not forgotten him. As Moses walked, something unusual caught his attention. A bush that was on fire, yet the flames didn't consume it. Curious, he approached, and that's when everything changed. Exodus 3 verse 4 tells us that when God saw Moses turn aside to look, he called to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses." Imagine standing in Moses' place, feeling the awe and disbelief as the creator of the universe. The God of the stars, the mountains, and the heavens calls your name. Moses had once lived surrounded by wealth in Egypt, but that meant nothing now. Nothing could compare to the direct encounter he was about to have with the Almighty. In Exodus 3 verse 5, God said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." In that moment, Moses understood he was not having an ordinary experience. He removed his sandals, recognizing the sacredness of the moment. The very ground, once just dirt and dust, had become holy in God's presence. Then God spoke again, declaring in Exodus 3 verse 6, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses trembled, covering his face, overwhelmed with reverence. Why was God revealing himself now? Moses had likely questioned his purpose for years. He had once lived in Pharaoh's palace, but after fleeing Egypt, he found himself as nothing more than a shepherd. Had he missed his calling? No. God had been preparing him all along. Every season of his life, every experience, from the palace to the wilderness. Then God revealed why he had come. In Exodus 3 verses 7 to 8, the Lord said, "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them." God had heard the cries of the Israelites and had already decided to act. But instead of taking direct action, God chose Moses, a man living in exile, a man who probably thought his time had passed. But where Moses saw failure, God saw preparation. Where Moses saw insignificance, God saw purpose. Where Moses saw a shepherd, God saw a deliverer. Have you ever felt like Moses, looking at your past and wondering if you missed your chance or if it's too late? God doesn't see your limitations. He sees your potential and your future. What God said next changed everything for Moses. "I am who I am," God declared. These words were not just an introduction, they carried eternal power. They revealed the God who exists beyond time, who needs nothing and depends on no one. Moses had asked for a name, but what he received was a revelation of God's eternal nature. This was not just a moment in history. Centuries later, Jesus Christ would declare, "Before Abraham was, I am," directly connecting himself to the God who spoke to Moses. With these words, Jesus revealed his divinity and his identity as the same eternal I am. God's name is not just a title, it's a promise. It declares that he is unchanging, ever-present, and sovereign. And just like Moses, you are invited to trust in I am today. No matter what you face, God remains the source of everything you need, just as he was for Moses. So take this moment to acknowledge the power of I am in your life. Moses still had his doubts and questioned whether he was the right person for the task. He focused on his weaknesses, past failures, and shortcomings. Yet, God wasn't concerned with what Moses lacked. He was focused on who he himself was. I am would be enough. Moses' journey was just beginning, and the power of God's name was about to be revealed in ways Moses could never have imagined. The miracles that followed would shake the foundations of Egypt, proving that no earthly power, wealth, or even Pharaoh himself could stand against the authority of the one true God. What happened next would show just how powerful the name I am truly was. Through the 10 plagues of Egypt, Moses had received the revelation of God's name, but now it was time for action. He was no longer just a shepherd in the wilderness. He had become the chosen messenger of I am. His mission was clear: return to Egypt, stand before Pharaoh, and declare that the God of Israel demanded the freedom of his people. But Pharaoh was no ordinary ruler. He was the most powerful man in the known world, the embodiment of Egyptian wealth, strength, and authority. His empire had been built on the backs of Israelite slaves, and he had no intention of letting them go. To Pharaoh, the gods of Egypt were supreme, and he considered himself among them. Who was this I am that dared to challenge his rule? Pharaoh scoffed at Moses' words, saying, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." This defiance was a direct challenge to God's authority. Pharaoh did not acknowledge I am, but he was about to. What followed was one of the most dramatic displays of divine power in history. God unleashed 10 plagues upon Egypt, each one a judgment not only against Pharaoh but against the false gods of Egypt. First, the Nile River turned to blood, striking at the heart of Egyptian life and prosperity. The Nile wasn't just any river. It was their source of wealth, trade, and fertility. In an instant, it became undrinkable and toxic, showing that the gods they trusted were powerless before I am. Then came the frogs, gnats, and flies, each disrupting Egypt's comfort and pride. These weren't mere annoyances. They were devastating, invading homes, disrupting daily life, and humiliating a people known for their order and control. Still, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. The plagues intensified. Livestock perished, diseases spread, and hail rained down, destroying crops and crippling the economy. The gods Egypt relied on for prosperity and protection were exposed as worthless idols. Even then, Pharaoh refused to listen. The locusts came next, devouring what little remained, followed by 3 days of complete darkness. The sun, Egypt's most revered deity, was blotted out, as if I am was declaring that even the greatest god of Egypt was nothing before him. But the final plague was the most devastating of all. In one night, the angel of death swept through Egypt, claiming the lives of every firstborn son. Only those who had placed the blood of the lamb on their doorposts were spared. a foreshadowing of something even greater to come, the ultimate Lamb whose blood would one day cover the sins of the world. Pharaoh could resist no longer. The power of I Am had been made undeniable, and he finally let Israel go. What followed was a miraculous deliverance that would be remembered for generations. Moses had doubted and feared, questioning whether he was the right man for the task. But God proved that it was never about Moses' strength, it was always about God's power. That same power, the power of I Am, is still at work today. No force, no wealth, no kingdom can stand against him. What he declares, he fulfills. What he promises, he accomplishes. Yet, the journey for Israel was far from over. Although they had been freed, they were about to face their greatest test. What happened next would reveal whether they truly believed in the God who had delivered them. The power of I Am was not confined to the burning bush or the plagues of Egypt. It wasn't limited to the parting of the Red Sea or the miracles in the wilderness. The same God who revealed himself to Moses would later walk among his people, not as a voice from fire, but as a man, Jesus Christ. For centuries, Israel had clung to the name I Am as their source of hope and identity. They had seen its power in their deliverance from Egypt, in their victories over enemies, and in the provision of the Promised Land. Yet they longed for something more, the coming of the Messiah, the one who would restore all things and establish God's kingdom forever. Then, in the quiet town of Bethlehem, I Am became flesh. Jesus did not come as many had expected. He wasn't born into wealth or luxury, nor did he rise through the ranks of religious or political leaders. Instead, he came humbly, born in a manger and raised as a carpenter's son. Yet, from the very beginning, his presence carried an authority beyond human understanding. As he began his ministry, people marveled at his wisdom, his miracles, and the divine authority with which he spoke. But it was when he uttered the words, I Am, that the religious leaders could no longer ignore him. Before Abraham was, I am, he declared. This statement shook the foundations of their beliefs. They knew exactly what he was saying. Jesus wasn't just a prophet or teacher. He was claiming to be the very God who spoke to Moses. This was either the most blasphemous claim in history or the truth. Jesus continued to reveal his divine nature through statements that carried the same weight. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Each statement revealed a different aspect of God's character. Provider, guide, protector, truth. Everything Israel had known about I Am was being fulfilled in Christ. But just as Pharaoh resisted God's power in Egypt, the religious leaders resisted Jesus. Despite the miracles, they refused to believe. Their rejection culminated in Jesus' trial. When asked, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus replied, "I am." With those words, the leaders tore their robes in fury, accusing him of blasphemy and sentencing him to death. They thought they were putting an end to a false prophet, but they did not realize the full power of I Am. Jesus was crucified, and his body laid in a tomb. But 3 days later, he rose again, proving once and for all that he truly was I Am. His resurrection was the ultimate demonstration of God's power, not just over Egypt, but over death itself.